Good morning all. Today we're back down the farm as always. It's been a long time since I've uploaded a video. I know, I'm well out of touch with it. I hope you've all had a really good Christmas and looking forward to a good new year. I've finally found a few hours spare to come and do this video. I've been wanting to do it for a while. So we've been working on a product for quite a while, and it's finally up to a standard where I want to release it, as in release it for sale. But you know, I don't really give out instructions with a lot of my products. I tend to just do these videos and then link these videos. So that's what I'm doing today. Let's crack on. So first things first, I haven't really showed you around down the farm in quite a while. If you remember, I have a staircase now and a mezzanine and fresh air going into the cell, which is really nice. I also have a new door. I call this my emergency access door. So obviously when I'm in the dyno cell and like customers are down here and that, they have a tendency to all stand sort of here. And obviously when the car's there doing like 100 odd mile an hour, my thinking is if ever it catches fire and they need to get out in a hurry, they're one gonna have to run across these rollers, which in a blind panic could be quite dangerous, because the only door was out there. So I just thought, you know what, that's not ideal. So I had this little emergency door put in, and I must admit, I use this door a lot more than the other door. It's great. It's very, very skinny, but it was made to suit the internal metal bracing of the door that was there. They just sort of went in between it. So yeah, that's my new door. It's a bit chilly down here today, so I have my heater on the go. It's not quite up to temperature yet because the hood fan hasn't cut in, but it's making some weird clicking noises that it's never normally made, but we will see. But yeah, other than that, that's about it. So I need to clear this lot out. I need to empty the bin because that's getting a bit full, and then we will crack on. Yeah, right. So this is the product I'm going to be reviewing today. I've been working a long time on this product, literally like over a year, like developing it, getting different people to make different bits for me, a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing and stuff like that. I like to get my products like 100% before I sell them, because it just saves me aggravation in the long run, and it saves customers being upset in the long run. That's why I've been talking about it for a very long time, but it has taken me a long while to get to this point. You've probably read the titles, so you know exactly what it is, what you're going to be looking at. Basically, it's an EFI conversion, or it's an ECU conversion, should I say, for the Renault C1J engine. Now, the Renault C1J engine, it was used in quite a lot of vehicles, but mostly most people know it for the 1980s Renault 5 GT Turbo. And the idea come about this kit was there was nothing on the market like I'm going to loosely use the term plug and play, although I'm not advertising this as a plug and play kit. You will need some understanding of wiring, you will need a laptop, you will need to be able to use a computer. Ideally, you will need a timing light. You need to understand how an engine works and what it's about and stuff like that. But I'm putting this video together because I like to show people the product start to finish, and then me actually fitting the product as well, because then you get a better idea of it, and then hopefully you can understand whether you'll be able to tackle it yourself at home or not. So there is loads of people have done like, electronic fuel injection conversions on the Renault 5 GT turbos, or the Renault C1J engine, should I say. But the idea behind this kit is that you can fit it at home, on your driveway within about an hour, I'd like to think, maybe quicker depending how good you are on the spanners. But the difference with this kit to other kits is it doesn't use the standard crank sensor. So the standard crank sensor that the C1J engine comes with, it's got a really weird trigger pattern from memory. I think it's like a 44:2:2 that repeats. So you can't really get, like an ECU can't use it directly to quite understand the position of the engine. It will only really work with like a single coil and a distributor like it's designed to do. I did build a kit using that crank sensor and the standard pickup, and then I used a custom distributor cap with a single tooth trigger in the distributor for a TDC reference. But cut a long story short, it was just a bit of a faff and it didn't work, and you'll see why I've done it this way soon. Right, this is the box, let's get into it. So this is the box and this is what's inside. I'm going to talk about each product one bit at, or each product, each bit one bit at a time, and explain what it is, what its purpose, why you've got it. But I'm sure by the time you get to the end of this video, you'll understand it all, because I'm going to fit it all to my test vehicle, film it and show you. So yeah, right, first things first, you get the MaxxECU Mini ECU. This is their entry-level ECU, but just because it's entry-level, it doesn't mean that it's like a budget or anything like that. It's got 4 ignition drivers, 4 injector drivers, so it's perfect for the C1J engine. It's got a built-in 43 PSI map sensor. It's got a USB connector, so you can connect it straight to your laptop. There's no need for any aftermarket RS232 converters or anything, you know, outdated like that. You also comes supplied with the actual the data cable to connect, you know, USB one end to the laptop, and the micro USB to connect to the ECU the other end. When you download the M-Tune software, I'll put a link to this in the description. You have to download the M-Tune software off the MaxxECU website. When you download that software, it downloads all the drivers and everything that's needed for this ECU to connect directly to your laptop with this wire. So there's no fuffing about with drivers and, you know, downloading all sorts of different links and files. Just download the software, plug it in, and away you go. I've never ever come unstuck with any of the laptops I've used connecting to a MaxxECU. This is why I like that product so much, because you take it out the box, you wire it up, as soon as you plug your USB in and download the software, bang, it just connects, no problem whatsoever. So yeah, that's why I've gone with this ECU. So some of the awesome features of this ECU, it's got built-in data logging. As I've said, it's got the built-in map sensor, it's got CAN bus for dashes, closed loop fueling, closed loop boost control, anti-lag, flat shifting, rolling launch. Oh, you know, the list is absolutely endless. Just have a look at the specs of this ECU. To be fair, it's way overkill for a C1J engine, if I'm being honest, but it is, you know, if you're gonna fit something, you might as well fit the best of the best, you know what I mean? So yeah, a bit cheesy that. Right, so that's the ECU. Next bit. This is the coil. This is a Volkswagen coil. I use this type of coil on all my applications. This is a genuine Delphi one supplied with a kit, so not some cheap Chinese eBay version. Be careful with them. I have come unstuck with the cheap Chinese ones. They've caught me out with misfires and stuff like that. So that's why I always supply a genuine branded version with my kits. This has got built-in coil drivers built into the top of them. This coil driver is matched to the coil from factory. The MaxxECU Mini doesn't have built-in drivers. That's why I use this type of coil with all of my applications. This coil's a lot better than, like, say, your full ZTEC coil or something like that. Purely for the fact that I've used these up to about 550 horsepower on a 4-cylinder engine. After that, I tend to go to coil and plug. So this will be perfect for, I would say, 98% of C1J owners. So yeah, more so Renault 5 GT Turbo owners I was aiming that comment at, because I've never really seen too many, you know, past the 400 horsepower mark. So this coil will be absolutely perfect, I'm sure. So yeah, that's the coil. Next in the box, this is the bit I'm most proud of. This is the C1J distributor cap. It's a billet distributor cap. It's got my company logo in it, which looks really nice. It's custom made out of one block of billet, so it is very, very nice, and the tolerances on this were absolutely perfect. You also get the trigger wheel. I'll show you what this does soon. This is a 12-tooth trigger wheel. Well, actually it's an 11-tooth trigger wheel, because one tooth's been knocked off, so that the ECU's got a reference point. So yeah, that's the trigger wheel. That's the distributor cap that comes with it. It's really, really nice. I like that. Also, you get a crank sensor. This crank sensor fits into the distributor cap in there, and it's held in by the supplied bolt and washers. All the hardware comes with the kit. It will start making more sense once I start fitting it. I'm just showing you what's in the box. You get a custom set of HT leads. These have got VW coil connectors one end, and they've got Renault 5 GT Turbo, or sorry, they've got Renault C1J connectors the other end. I don't just want to aim this kit purely at Renault 5 GT Turbo owners. I just want to aim it at the C1J engine in general, because this engine was used in quite a few different Renaults. So yeah, this fits the spark plugs on a C1J one end and the Volkswagen coil on the other, and they're all made to length. Again, you'll see soon. You also get a custom powder coated C1J to Volkswagen coil pack bracket. Comes with all the spacers and the hardware to fit it. Nice little captive nuts on the back, These are all powder coated in black, and they're a very nice bit of engineering, if I don't say so myself. So yeah, again, I'll show you that soon. You get a custom C1J wiring loom. I'm running out of room on my little bench here. I should have had a tidy up. I'm going to show you all the connectors on this soon, more so when I'm fitting it in the car, and you can see what it's all about. But you get the wiring loom as well, and you get a wiring diagram that shows you what every wire in my loom does. Most of the wires are obviously all pre-wired for all the connectors and stuff, but you know, it comes with a diagram anyway, just in case. So yeah, right, now let's move on to the test vehicle. Right, so for those of you who don't know, this is my dyno cell, and this is my test vehicle. This is my E-Reg 1980s Renault Extra van. This is a 1.4 petrol, so it's got the 1400 C1J engine, which is pretty much identical in, you know, physical size and terms to the Renault 5 GT turbo engine. Obviously, it's just not turbocharged yet. This is my dyno. It is a Dyno Dynamics 1200 horsepower rolling road. I don't think we're going to hit the limits of that today. Obviously, I've got screens so I can see what's going on. Got the control box and all the control centre down here, all the modules for my dyno, all up there, powered up lovely. Got a NTK Lambda controller, Ultronic or a proper Dyno Dynamics one. So yeah, but keeping to the point, this is the van that I'm going to be showing you how to fit the kit on. It's a very, very similar engine bay and a very, very similar engine to the Renault 5 GT Turbo, again obviously with that turbocharger attached to it. So yeah, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this van on the rolling road, and I'm going to let it warm up to temperature. Once it's up to temperature, I'm going to do a power run on the dyno, see what power it makes on the standard carburetor and the standard ignition control module thing, and see what power it makes, and then we'll strip it all off, fit my ECU kit, and let's see if we can get any more power out of it. So yeah, let's crack on. I'm going to roll it into the rollers because obviously it's backed up because I normally have another car here overnight. So I'm going to get it in the rollers, spin it up, and see where we go from there. Right, let's do it. So this is my engine bay, the very famous C1J engine, as used in a lot of Renault 5 GT turbos, well, all Renault 5 GT turbos from factory, I believe. The only difference being with the engine bay on this and a Renault, there's quite a few little differences to be fair, but I believe that the ignition module on a Renault 5 GT turbo, it sits up here, where in my one it sits over here in the engine bay. Doesn't overly matter. Obviously it's got the vac pipe connecting to the inlet manifold off as standard. We're going to use that to connect to the map sensor on the MaxxECU Mini. But yeah, so this is the engine bay as you would normally see in standard under your bonnet. Obviously if it's turbocharged, you'd have boost pipes and that sort of stuff everywhere. But yeah, this is the basic engine that I've based the kit around with this style of distributor. I'll show you why in a minute. You need to make sure, excuse me, burping up my breakfast there. You need to make sure that the distributor, the rotor arm shaft in your distributor is 10mm. I believe there's two different sizes. I believe there's an 8mm and I believe that there's a 10mm. But I've only made this kit to fit the 10mm distributors. Another thing to note as well, the distributor on this in particular engine has got the clips to hold the distributor cap on. You need to make sure you've got the distributor that's got a screw type distributor basically, so the cap's held on by two little threaded screws rather than the clips. If you've got the clip type like this has, I'll show you what you need to do. You basically need to change this distributor for a Renault 5 GT Turbo distributor. So again, just to cover, if you've got a clip-on type distributor cap like that, you will need to source a Renault 5 GT Turbo distributor cap. I can't make a kit to suit everyone's needs, so I've based it around the most popular parts, if you know what I mean, so that's why. But yeah, right, I'm going to start this fan up, let it warm up to temperature. I've got it on the rollers, put some side straps on it, got some back straps, got some wheel chocks, got the cooling fan in front, blah blah blah. I'm going to let it get hot, I'm going to do a power run and see where we sit. So yeah. Right, got the little Renault all set up on the dyno. It's all nice and warmed up now and up to temperature. Been running for about half hour. I'm going to move the big fan in front of it. I doubt this is going to make too much difference, but you know, every little helps. Little bouncing bomb. I'm going to turn the extractors on. Here. Two big fans up there, drag all the exhaust gases out. I'm going to come out here and turn the big fan on. I haven't moved this switch into the dyno cell yet. Woo! Toasty! There's a little flame going in there. Probably can't hear me now. I'm going to do a dyno run. So I've done a couple of back-to-back runs. This van as standard is meant to make 68 or 69 horsepower apparently. So bearing in mind it's like nearly a 40-year-old van, that ain't too bad. I've done a couple of runs back-to-back, and this is when it started making peak power. I think I really got the oil up to temperature because it was gaining, and now it's sort of flowed around the power it's making now. So 63.4 horsepower and 113 foot-pound of torque. The torque might be up quite high because I am doing this power on in third gear, purely for the sake that it hasn't really got, well, it has got the power to do it in fourth, but the power on will be like forever. I'll just be like dragging it out through the revs, trying to get it to over 100 mile an hour. I'm also doing horsepower and torque versus road speed. I haven't got a RPM reference from the engine, one to feed into the dyno or to do the gear ratio calculator. I'll show you that soon once the ECU's on, because I will have. So that's why I'm having to reference it against wheel speed. So it went from, the pulls from 30 mile an hour, just over 80 mile an hour, and that's the power it makes. So yeah. Right, let's get fitting the kit. First thing you need to do is remove the distributor, and I will show you why. Even if you've got the right distributor for the kit, you still need to remove the distributor, and I'll explain. So yeah, all you need is an 11mm spanner, and let's pop it off. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove all the HT leads, taking the king lead off. Obviously this is the clip type distributor cap, which doesn't work with my kit, so I need to unbolt my distributor regardless. But you will need to unbolt your distributor regardless if you're using the right distributor or not. So discard that, none of that's needed anymore. There's the rotor arm, again none of that's needed. And down under here is a tiny little 11mm bolt from memory. So I'm just going to crack this bolt off. I'm going to have to stop because I need two hands. So there you go, it's loose. Going to wind that out by hand, pull the distributor out. So I've got the bolt out, and it comes with that little bracket there. Set that to one side, and distributor just slides out like that. Note how the prongs on the bottom of this distributor are offset, so it will only go in one way, and it goes down there into a little drive that also drives the oil pump as well. So make sure you don't run the engine with this not fitted. So yeah, that's the distributor, which obviously I'm going to discard, but I'll show you what you do with the Renault 5 distributor and how to fit it. Right, let's go back upstairs. Right, so this is a Renault 5 GT Turbo distributor. I got this off eBay. It was like a tenner with the leads. The leads were perished obviously, but I didn't need them, so I binned them. And this is basically what they look like. Note there's normally some little screws holding the cap on. I've been using this distributor for testing quite a while, so I've taken the screws out and I've lost them because I don't need them anyway. So yeah, take the cap off. You'll then have a rotor arm. Pull the rotor arm off. That just yanks off, and you're left with something like this. What you'll then need to do is clean all around that edge. It needs to be absolutely spotless clean, no corrosion whatsoever. And same with the shaft. I've done this on like a bench wire wheel, but you can do it with like a wire wheel and a drill and stuff like that. It needs to be clinically clean because the tolerances of this kit are so tight that if you don't get this bit right, you will run into problems. So that's what you need to do. Again, make sure that that shaft is 10mm in diameter. If it's 8mm, you will need to change to this style of distributor. Again, they're very easy to find. This is the most common one that they all use. I believe it's 8mm anyway, something like that. But yeah, So that's what the distributor looks like. You will then need to get your, where's he put it? Your little trigger wheel, and you will need a 2.5mm Allen key. So what you need to do, it's going to be quite hard to show you with one hand, but I will. Professional as always. So you know you've got like a tiny little cutout. This locates the rotor arm normally in the right position. You need to line that cutout up with this tooth here. So if you look at the wheel from above, you've got the big missing tooth gap there. That cutout needs to align as best as you can get it with the middle tooth that side. So all you do is slide that on there like that. So it needs to look something like that. You need to line that up with that as best as you can get it. Once that's lined up with there, you need to make sure that is pushed completely flat onto the base of the distributor. So if I take that off again, you'll see there's this little flat, this whole bit rotates, but you need to get the base of that trigger wheel to sit absolutely perfectly flat and flush onto there. Sometimes they can be a bit tight, so you might have to, you know, give them a little tap. Don't go crazy, because these are only little distributors. You don't want to break anything. But yeah, make sure you're confident in knowing what you're doing. But yeah, as I said, you need to get that as perfectly flat as you can onto there. This one slides on pretty well. Again, lining up that tooth with that flat notch. As you can see, it's pissed, so that needs to be perfectly in line with that. Then once you get that sorted, if you look underneath, there's a tiny little grub screw. It is a 2.5mm Allen key. You then I would advise putting a tiny little bit of Loctite just to save this coming off, or lock and seal, whatever you want to use. But tighten this up very, very gently. Don't go mad with it. It is only a tiny little grub screw. If you start hanging off the Allen keys, you will strip it, you will round it, and I will not replace it, because once that's damaged, you'll have to buy another trigger wheel. So yeah, make sure that's nice and tight, Loctited in. Again, make sure that's flush, you can see through there, and that's that step done. Right, next, take your distributor cap without the crank sensor in it, so take the crank sensor out. The distributor caps themselves, I supply the bolts, and these threaded bolts go straight through into the distributor base. A lot of these that I've seen have got the threads stripped out of them, where people have over tightened them, because they're a very, very fine thread. Can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but very, very fine. So what I've done is, with the bolts supplied with the caps, I've made them a little bit longer, and I've supplied nuts as well. The reason for this is so that you can, once they're screwed on, you can put little nylock nuts on the back just to stop them undoing. Don't go mad with the tightness of these. They're only very, very, you know, very, very fine threads. They don't need to be that tight. It's just there as a precaution. I thought it would be good to add it. So yeah, let's get this fitted. This is a 4mm Allen key, and you'll need an 8mm spanner. Right, so you fitted all your trigger wheel, you've lined up that, everything's tight, this is already ready, good to go. Now, take note of this little cutout here. This little cutout is very important that you get this side right. So, this little cutout faces the front of the engine, and it needs to line up with this little knobbly bit which holds the crank sensor itself. So that needs to go on like that. That's how it needs to line up, he says. Not like that, like that. So once the screw holes are lined up, that little cutout is there, and it needs to look like that from above. If your cutout's over here, you fitted it wrong and your engine will not run. So please double check this. So yeah, there's a little cutout there. There's the crank sensor holder. Once this is pushed in like that, push the cap on flush. Now let me stand you up. Make sure the cap goes on completely flush by hand. Like that. You want it all nice and tight around the edges, sitting flush. Do not pull it down home with the bolts, you will damage it. So you can twist it round, line it all up, screw goes in, screw goes in, tighten these up, tiny little nip. Thread's all right in this distributor. And then obviously you put the little washers and the little nuts on the back of the thread sticking out, and just give them a tiny little nip just for a little bit extra of precaution. Right, this is the lock nut for the crank sensor, for the retaining bolt, should I say. Whoops. Now, what you need to do at this point is turn the distributor, make sure that everything turns freely, make sure nothing's locking up. You can even do this before you put the cap on as well. Now, the reason for this is, if you feel how easy that turns, once you take your crank sensor and you fit that in, it's then got the bolt and the washer holding the crank sensor in, like that. That is held in by a 4mm Allen key bolt again as well. Doesn't have to be mega tight, just hand tight like that. Now, once that's in, you now twist it, and you need to feel, it's hard to show on camera, but as I'm turning that, I can feel where it's a magnetic VR sensor, it actually sticks to the prongs on the actual trigger wheel. But what I'm feeling for is to make sure it's a nice clean and turning, the sensor's not hitting the trigger wheel or anything like that. And this one feels absolutely fine as I expected. The reason why I say you need to remove your distributor regardless if you've got the right distributor or not is I want you to put this cap on and that trigger wheel and that sensor, and then turn this by hand to make sure it all turns freely. If you've got this bolted in your engine and you bolt it all on and you try and start it and that hits something and it snaps this and breaks the oil drive, that's on you. That is totally all on you. That is your problem to sort out. If you do it this way, you will not come unstuck. So that's that. Here's one I made earlier. This is the one we used for testing. So this is the one I'm going to fit into my van. It's exactly the same, although it's got slightly different writing. But yeah, this was the finished product. So let's put this in the van. Actually, put some screws in it and then put it in the van. So also, I forgot to mention, once this cap is screwed on, if you do feel that there's a little bit of resistance, also check by pushing this shaft in. So push it in that way and twist. If you can feel it rubbing very slightly on the sensor, what you can do is take this out and put a tiny little bit of shim behind that sensor to space it out. If you haven't really got, if you don't know what kind of shim to use, you can use something like tin foil or something like that, just to move that sensor away just from the trigger wheel. But this one's absolutely fine. But I've had some, because obviously these distributors are quite worn now. So if you've got like a bit of it in and out free play like this one has, you find if you push that in while twisting it, you'll be able to hear the actual sensor catching on the trigger wheel. Obviously the tolerance between the tip of that sensor and the trigger wheel is really, really close, because it needs to be for a clean signal. So if you find that, again, just space it out, but you shouldn't have many problems. Just use your head, basically, use your head. So yeah, let's get this fitted. Right, so this is the tricky bit. You need to peer down into there. You can't see it very well, but you need to sort of, you want to try and align the offset prongs with the obviously the prongs in the drive. It's a little bit tricky, but you're gonna eyeball that there. That's the wrong way round, like that, and then hopefully he says he'll get that in. There we go. In. Nope, I lied, not in. Let's try again. About there, I reckon. Aha, there we go, in. You could probably take this distributor cap off if you want and like twist the motor arm to settle it in, but once you've got it all built up and working and you know that the tolerances are all nice and clear and stuff like that, it's probably better to just leave it as is. But yeah, so got that in sitting flush now. Gonna put all the bolt back in and move on to the next step. So right, for the next step, I've obviously bolted the coil pack with the supplied hardware to the actual coil pack bracket. Now, if you look down on the cylinder head here, there's two bolts. Now, normally there's like a lifting eye here. If you undo these bolts, discard the lifting eye. You might see in one of my older videos, I actually made a temporary coil pack bracket by welding a flat plate to the lifting eye. And that's obviously what this has been based on. So what I'm gonna do is undo these two 13mm, and I'm gonna bolt this coil there, like that. So yeah, that's how it goes. I'm not gonna show you like unbolting all the little bolts. You know how to do bolts. If you don't know how to undo bolts and do up bolts, then this definitely isn't the kit for you. But yeah, right, let's crack on with that. Bosh, there you have it. Coil pack all bolted up and mounted. Very nice. Right, next, HT leads. Let me show you how these HT leads go on and what cylinder they go on. or how they go onto what cylinder rather. Yeah, let's crack on. Right, so I've got the coil pack bolted up and now I've fitted all the HT leads. Now, the way these HT leads go on, if you look on these coils, if you look down by the pegs, you can't really see it that clear on the camera, but down here it's got A, B, C, D. So if you imagine A, B, C, D is cylinders 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's basically how the leads go on. So A over here goes down to cylinder 1. Obviously, being the C1J engine, number 1 is closest to the flywheel. On a normal engine, say normal engine, on most other engines, cylinder 1 is closest to the crank pulley, but the French do it this way. So cylinder 1 is here. So as you can see, A goes down to cylinder 1, B comes round there to cylinder 2, C, cylinder 3, and 4, cylinder 4. Or D, cylinder 4. Now this is the only downside of this kit, because of, I say downside, it's not really a downside, but because it's a VR sensor, it's got like a little electromagnet built into the sensor, and as the trigger wheel swipes over the tip of it, it gives like a wave pattern, which the ECU uses for reference. You want to try and keep these high tension leads or high voltage HT leads away from this sensor as best as you can. You'll see in a minute when I lay the loom out and start plugging it in that I've left plenty of length to run the crank sensor wiring around the front away from it. But obviously try and tuck these leads, particularly cylinders 3 and 4 lead, try and tuck them far back as you can so they're not near. Maybe put some little cable ties or something like that, whatever you need to do to keep them away from this sensor. I have had it where if the leads are too close, you do get a bit of sync issue, but as long as it's like this, it's absolutely fine. So yeah, right now, I'm going to move on to the wiring loom. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to mount the ECU. I'm going to cheat a little bit here because this is the development van, and been using this to develop the kit over the last 12 months. So as you can see here, this is the standard ignition control module. If you look over here, there's already a MaxxECU Mini mounted here. This is the one I use for testing. It's been here for the last 12 months. These are water resistant. Well, they are splash proof. So in an ideal world, you want to put this in some sort of a sealed enclosure. But I've been running mine there. I've had mine mounted here for the last 12 months and there's been no problems whatsoever. So again, that is entirely up to you, but the ECU is advertised as waterproof and I've never run into any problems with water ingress or anything like that. Obviously, just make sure that the rubber bungs push back in when you're not mapping and stuff like that. So yeah, I've bolted mine here. You don't have to bolt yours here. You can mount yours anywhere in this general area. I've just sort of laid mine out with the ECU here, and that's how I've sort of laid the loom out. The little vac pipe off of the nose of the standard module, it runs down there under the inlet manifold. You don't have to use this one, it just happened to reach for me. So if I push that little bung out and then push the pipe in underneath, comes up here with plenty of slack and it pushes onto the standard map sensor. Absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to use that. You don't have to use that, you can use a bit of silicone. Just make sure it's tight on there. I think it's a 3 or 4 mil barb, the manual will tell you. Put a little cable tie around it, especially if you're forced induction, because the last thing you want is that popping off. But yeah, so that's the ECU mounted, cheating I know. That's the vac pipe connected. So now I'm going to lay out the wiring loom. So before I fit the wiring loom, I thought maybe it's best that I just lay the loom out and show you guys exactly what the loom is and what all the connectors do before I fit it on the car and it gets a bit too complicated. So back up in the office, I've got the wiring loom laid out, as you can see. I'm going to start from this end and work my way down. So I'll start with this. This is like what I call the spare wiring loom. So this is the spare wires of the loom that wasn't used when I made the harness for the C1J engine. The only real wires you need out of this to get it running are these two, which have got 2 inline fuses. These need to go to a decent ignition live, ideally 25-30 amps. One of them powers the ECU and the other powers like the coil and the injectors and things like that. It's all pretty much self-explanatory on the supplied wiring diagram what it does anyway. On these spare wires, if you don't know what they do, they are all color coded, and if you look, say like I'll grab this green one for instance, it says ECU 1G. So if you go down here to the green wire, GPO out 2 is G1, 1G on the wiring loom, but it's the same wire. and every wire here is labelled so you know what it does, and it's all a reference to this wiring diagram that's supplied. But again, you don't overly need to worry about all of that. As long as you connect this to an ignition, these two to an ignition live, it'll be enough to get you up and running. These are spare inputs and outputs and stuff. The greens can be used to wire up, you know, like fuel pump relay, or they can wire drive cooling fan relays, or a boost control solenoid that is actually pre-wired into the loom. I'll show you in a minute. You can wire up all pressure sensors going into the ECU, so if the oil pressure drops, it will turn the engine off, and all sorts of things like that. The ECU is fully configurable. So yeah, that's what all that lot's for. So if you want to know what all these wires are, just look at the diagram, and it's all labelled with the end of the wire. Right, moving on, this is the main ECU connector. This obviously plugs into the Max Mini ECU itself. This is all wired up, you don't need to do anything with it. Moving down, I have added grommets to the loom. These are quite loose, but they're designed to have a small cable tie around them, so when you get them in the right place, you can slide them up and down, or put more wires through it if you do want to mount the ECU inside of the car. Obviously the grommet is big enough so that if you drill a big enough hole, this loom will go through the hole, and then the grommet will fit in it. Moving down, this first plug here that you see here, this is for the wideband 02. Again, you don't need this, but I've pre-wired it into the loom just in case. I do sell on my website MaxxECU CAN Lambda modules, and they're designed to plug straight into here. Ideally, if you've got a road going car, you want your ECU to see air fuel ratio, because if it does, when it's in closed loop fueling mode, it will constantly trim the fueling as you drive, and it will get you like the best fuel consumption and stuff like that. And it's a lot better for mapping and logging, and for safety parameters as well. For instance, if you're booting out the road and your fuel pump dies or something like that, rather than the engine run lean and it get taken out, the wideband Lambda sensor will notice this, the ECU will know it's gone out of parameters, and it will shut the engine down and put you into limp mode, and it will also log a fault code, so when you plug your laptop in, you'll see it be like lean running conditions or something like that. And it's better for mapping as well. It does make my life easier if you bring it to me for mapping. So yeah, that's what that's for. I'm sure I'll show you this all connected up in the future at some point. Next wire down, this is just one of the GPOs. So GPO is a general purpose output. These four wires, four green wires in the loom, are GPOs. There's 3 spare in here still, and GPO 3 I believe I've wired up for boost control. So if you buy a Mac valve from me, or boost control solenoid from me, if you want the ECU to control boost, you can plug it directly into this, and my base map will be already set up for the Mac valve that I supply that will plug into this, and then you can control the boost electronically. So you can have different boost settings and stuff like that. So yeah, it's great. Right, moving down the loom, I will do one plug at a time as best as I can. Tell you what. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. Got into a bit of a knot here. This is a coil pack plug. It says, you know that because it says coil on it. That plugs straight into the coil that I supply, and this needs to be grounded to the bracket somewhere. You can put it on one of the bolts, or onto the side of the cylinder head, or something like that. Ideally, when you do bolt that wire and ground it to the cylinder head, you also want to find this wire here, which is the ground for the ECU. This ideally needs to be ground to the cylinder head. Do not connect this to the battery, do not connect it to the chassis. It needs to be grounded onto the engine to save any electrical noises and stuff like that. This is how MaxxECU recommend it, so this is how I've built my looms to suit. Just follow by the rules and you won't get unstuck basically. So yeah, that's the ground for the ECU. Next one, this is inlet air temperature sensor. So I do sell Bosch style air temp sensors, or COSI style air temp sensors. They're very fast acting. You're going to need this connected for mapping and stuff like that, especially on a boosted application, so you can keep an eye on charge temps and things like that. So yeah, that's what that does. Moving on, this one is coolant temp sensor. Again, I'll show you where I've mounted the coolant temp sensor on my C1J engine. I've just had little adapters made. I will eventually put these on my website and on my eBay shop, but this is so the engine can see coolant temp the temperature of the engine itself, for like, you know, cold start enrichments, and if it starts getting too hot, again put the engine into limp mode and all things like that. So this is a must. You must connect this. This one here, it feels a bit of a thicker cable. That's because it's a shielded cable. This is the crank sensor, which is upside down. Crank sensor. This plugs onto the distributor cap, the sensor that I've already shown you. Again, when I lay it all out, I'll plug it in and I'll show you. And then this little batch of wire in here, this one is the throttle position sensor. The reason why I've put this style of plug on the throttle position sensor is, I will show you. So a friend of mine made this inlet manifold for me. This is just a Renault 5 GT Turbo alloy inlet, and he's cut the back off, made this big plenum to go over the back. And then what I've done is I've fitted, all I had to hand was a full ZTEC throttle body. They're a lot bigger than the standard like C1J carburetor butterfly. I think they're like 2.5 times the size, something like that. So they're not too big for the Renault. They're about the perfect size in my experience. So I've pre-wired the wiring looms to suit the connector for a ZTEC throttle position sensor, because a lot of people use these sensors on throttle bodies and aftermarket applications anyway. If you don't like that sensor, no big problem, you can just cut the plug off and fit whatever plug you want. The reason why I went for these throttle bodies is because they come with the TPS built on. The seal already mounts in the bottom of the throttle body. They have got a lip, so a boost pipe will fit over the top. It is a bit close to the fuel rail. This was version 1, and I was using a different style of throttle body, and it did have plenty of clearance. So this isn't my mate's fault, this is definitely my fault. The new batch that we're having made has got a slightly bigger plenum to move the throttle body that way more, so it clears. But also going with this throttle body, you can adjust the throttle stop down here. You just need to dig the glue out the threads, and then you can adjust it with an Allen key to adjust the idle. And they have the bracket already attached to the throttle body for the throttle cable. So that's why I went with this throttle body. It was cheap, readily available, and it works, and that's why the loom is wired up like that. Put that back on the shelf. God, I'm getting tired. I'm doing so much talking. I haven't done this much talking in ages. So that's the throttle position sensor. These really self-explanatory. These are the fuel injectors, cylinder 1, 2, 3 and 4. Again, plenty of length, so once it's all laid out, it'll all work. And that is all you need to wire up to get this ECU working. So let's get it fitted and let's get it working. Right, let's crack on. Right, so I've plugged the ECU in. I've run the loom along here, crudely pushed the grommet in. I haven't really spent much time, I just sort of pushed it through quickly. The loom runs here. Where should I start? So you've got the crank sensor wire comes round here. I've sort of just wedged it. Obviously, you know, if you spend a bit of time, you can make it look a lot neater, but for the purpose of this video, I'm just quickly throwing it in. It's literally taken me 5 minutes to fit it and plug everything in, and that's the idea of the game. You can fit it at home yourself within about an hour, ideally. So yeah, that's why I've just chucked it in. So yeah, the crank sensor loom comes round here onto the crank sensor on top of the distributor cap. Coil plug plugs onto the coil. The little earth wire at the plug I've earthed onto there, and I've also earthed the ECU to the same point. If you want to make it look a bit neater, I suppose, into the bracket, you could drill and tap it or hide the wire down here so you don't see it as much. Would make a nicer job of it. Air temp sensor is in there in the ducting. It's just I sort of just quickly drilled a little hole in the plastic and screwed the air temp sensor in as a reference. The loom is very, very long, but the way I've designed it is you can slide these labels, and let me show you. If you grab hold of them like that, you can slide them down the loom. So if you want to cut this down, like, you know, technically you could cut that down and just have that, you know, change the plug, cut that down shorter and have the plug just that long to make it look a lot neater. But I'd rather you have more wire than not enough wire. That's why I've made the loom a little bit generous, shall we say. So you can muck about with it and cut it about for your application, because, you know, not every car is going to be the same. There's definitely enough length there. If you wanted to go with a hole through the firewall and put the ECU inside the car, you could. But yeah, it's all sort of fitting this way as it does. This wire goes across over to the top over this side. I will walk around and show you. Comes across here, and then the coolant temp sensor wire, again very crudely thrown about, but you can move this label and shorten it if you want. I've had little adapters made that, so on my van there's just one outlet for the coolant temp sensor, and it ain't actually a coolant temp sensor. On my van it's just an overheating light, so when it gets too hot, obviously it brings a light on the dash. I wasn't too worried about having it, so I just had an adapter made that screws into the water pump, and then an M10x1 Bosch style coolant temp sensor screws into that. And I've just left this disconnected because obviously I'm not going to really use it. The ECU will now measure proper coolant temp, and if I wanted to connect a dash over CAN bus, which I have in the past, you can then, you know, watch all the temperatures on the dash. So yeah, Obviously I've got no EFI inlet manifold fitted, so down here is just the 4 injectors and the throttle position sensor. Obviously I've not connected them yet, so for now I'm just going to get it running as an ignition only ECU, which you can do obviously if you've got a Renault 5 GT Turbo. One of the benefits of setting it up like this is obviously you then get a fully configurable rev limiter. You can have a coolant based rev limiter as well, so when the engine's cold it'll only rev to like 4,000 RPM, and then as the engine gets warmer the rev limiter raises with coolant temp, so to protect your engine and stuff like that. So yeah, next we just need to wire up the 2 lives and then it should work. Now what I'm going to do for the purpose of testing is, I could, if I really wanted to, run these 2 wires straight over to the positive on the battery and just connect them up. And I think actually I might do that, to be fair. They are fused. Obviously you want to wire up to some sort of an ignition live. Bearing in mind you have down here, you've got the crank sensor, which isn't used. If you're using a Renault 5 GT Turbo, you'll need to leave this connected but unbolt the coil out the top of it and leave the coil off, otherwise it will just arc when the engine's running, and obviously you don't want that. But down here there's 2 wires on my setup, an earth and an ignition live. So what I could do is take a trigger off of that ignition live to a 3-pin relay, and then connect the 3-pin relay straight from the battery and then to these 2 lives, so that when you turn the ignition on and the ignition fires this up, it will then trigger the relay and then it will feed a solid 12 volts to both these fuses. For now I'm just going to run these wires because there's plenty of length there. I'm just going to run these over to the battery and connect them there, and see if we can get it running. So yeah, also on a Renault 5 you'll have an extra wire in this bottom plug which will be your trigger for your rev counter, and when the ignition unit triggers the rev counter, it'll also trigger the fuel pump relay. So you need to leave all this connected, but one of the plus sides of leaving all this connected is your rev counter will still work, your standard fuel pump relay will still work, and everything will, you know, that will still think it's controlling the engine, and it will control all the dash, and all your gauges will work as normal. So yeah, and then my ECU will work alongside it to have full control over ignition and fuel if you want, or just ignition, whatever. So yeah, enough waffling, let's get this connected, let's fire it up, let's see if we can make some more power. So there you go, for true backyard mechanic style, I've put it on a bullet connector. Don't do this, don't do it this way, just do it properly, do it once. Get it wired up to the ignition or our own little separate, you know, ignition switch inside the car. Do it once, do it right. But for now, that will work. So yeah, look, nice bullet crimp, 2 fuses, straight to ECU, bosh. Technically, it should run. What I should do is stop filming, make sure it runs, and then carry on filming. But I'm not. I'm just going to see if it fires up. Whoop. Oh, I need some choke. Look at that! It runs! Turn the choke down a bit. There you go. All up and running. So it's idling quite high, purely for the sake of, because it can see that the coolant temperature is low, it will wind more ignition into it to get it to drive better, and that's what it's doing. You know what, it might even run with no choke. There we go, look at that. Right, let's let it warm up, see if we can make some power, shall we? So you know what I just said? I just said, make sure you disconnect the standard CDI ignition control coil. I could hear an arcing. I was like, where's that coming from? I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but that is arcing like mad to ground. So I'm gonna turn it off. I can't turn it off, I've got no ignition switch. I'm gonna pull the wire. I'm gonna disconnect the crank sensor. That's the goofiest laugh I've ever done. So for argument's sake, I'm just going to disconnect this crank sensor, purely for the sake that my van doesn't have a rev counter. So unplugging that won't make no difference to the running on my van at all. Won't bring on no lights on the dash, because it doesn't have any warning lights like that. And now it'll run without the standard coil arcing like mad. Right, plug that back in. What a knob. There we go. It runs and no arcing. Whoop. Don't need that. Right, let's get it hot. Let's do some tuning. This is one step I completely forgot about, and literally as I jumped in the van with the ECU, I realised that I need to show you guys this as well. So I've got the ECU connected, I've got my bullet crimps plugged in so it's powered up. Got my laptop. This is just a cheap eBay laptop. This cost me like £100 delivered. It's got just a USB in the back of it. The battery life's pretty crap, hence I've got it plugged into the wall all the time. But I use these type of laptops all day, no problems at all. Once you've downloaded the M-Tune software, it will look like this on the desktop. Tell you what, let me move it into the middle so you can see what it looks like a bit better. Like that. It will say MaxxECU M-Tune. All these that look the same, these are all logs. But you don't want that, you want MaxxECU M-Tune. When you open it up, double click, it will come up with that screen, and then up in this corner it will say connecting, and when it goes green like that, it means the ECU is connected. I didn't do anything other than download the software, plug the USB cable in, make sure the ECU is turned on, and there it connects. As you can see up here it says warning, ECU errors detected. If I click on that, it will say throttle position sensor, or code 13, current code is a throttle position sensor error. Now the reason why there is a throttle position sensor error is obviously there isn't a throttle position sensor connected, because I've only got the coil connected. So annoyingly, that will have to just stay there and flash for now. Obviously you only see it when the ECU is plugged in. You can press R on the keyboard to reset this code, but obviously it will come straight back. And every time you cycle the ignition, it will log it as another code. So if you keep getting the same error over and over, when you plug the laptop in, you'll see a list of the same fault codes, or whatever fault codes you get. So yeah, that's it all connected now. What you need to do is go into inputs, and then you need to go to trigger inputs, or technically you can just press F11 on the keyboard and that will take you to this screen here. Once you're at trigger inputs, you will have on this screen here, first tooth angle. On my base map it is set to 7 degrees before top dead center. Now going back to the step where I obviously lined up the trigger wheel with a cutout on the distributor, the straighter you get that, the better it will be for this base map. But every different person who fits that trigger wheel will get it in a slightly different place, and every degree counts. So this step you will need to do for your application. Just because it fires up and run, it doesn't mean that the ECU and the engine is 100% dialed in together. The ECU can only go by the data that you input into it, and we need to make sure 100% that that's correct. So what we're doing now is we're dialing up the offset angle of the ECU with the trigger wheel within the distributor. It sounds mad. If you're worried about it, then get it up and running, bring it to me and I can do it for you. It's not a problem. Or anyone, any tuner with a dyno, not even a dyno, any tuner with a timing light and a top dead center gauge or a DTI gauge will be able to set this up. I will show you how I've done it. So what you need to do is you'll need a timing light. There's mine down on the floor. Get it nice and damp, exactly where it should be. You can't really see it that well because it is dark, but what I've got is a paint mark on my timing cover, and I've got a paint mark on my crank pulley. And what I've done was I took number 4 spark plug out, or you can take number 1 out, whatever you want to do. And I turned the engine over by hand. Again, you can turn the alternator pulley if you want, just yank on the belt. Some people do if you're old school, like that. There we go. It lines up now. So what I've done is with the piston at TDC on number 1, I have paint marked the crank pulley to the timing chain cover. So I know when these lines line up, it is exactly at TDC on cylinder number 1. Now what I will do is, with the engine running, I'll connect my timing light to cylinder number 1, and then I will lock the timing in the ECU, I'll show you how, to 15 degrees advance. So no matter what you do, the ECU will lock the timing and it will be firing number 1 spark plug 15 degrees before top dead center. And then what I'll do is, with my timing line connected to ignition lead number 1, I'll set my timing light to 15 degrees advanced before top dead center. And then what I'm doing is aiming my timing light down at them white paint marks I made, and while the engine's running, you want them paint marks to align. If they don't align, then you need to adjust, with the ignition timing locked, you need to adjust the first tooth angle on here, and then you can just swing it both ways while the engine's running. Keep checking it with a timing light and see how it works. But to be fair, if you align the trigger wheel like I've already shown you, you'll get it running. It should run absolutely fine. But yeah, let's do that now just to be sure. So I've got my engine running. As you can see down there, it says I've set that to 15 degrees before the ignition lock angle is set to 15 degrees before top dead center, and I've ticked the little box above it that says lock ignition angle. Now you can see down here in the menu bar here, ignition angle 15 degrees before top dead center. So now I know the ECU thinks it's firing the coil at 15 degrees before top dead center on cylinder 1. So I'll get my timing light that has died. So now I get my timing light. It's going to be really hard to show you this on camera, but I advance it to 15 degrees. If it would stay on. And now I can see, don't know where you can see that on camera, but paint marks are pretty much there. Technically what you want to do is you want to do this at a fast idle. So to cheat, I'm going to pull the choke up a little bit. So I've now got it at about 1100 RPM. Really hard to pick it up on the camera, but that is pretty spot on. So yeah, that's that side of it sorted. Right, so being totally honest with you, I did have to adjust the offset angle a little bit more, purely for the sake of where I've had the distributor in and out. There is a little bit of free play in that distributor. When it's actually in, you can twist it a few degrees either way. So I did have to dial it in with a timing light, like everyone has to. So see, even taking the distributor out and back in again, it's always good to set that back up. I ended up with a first tooth angle of 1 degree before top dead center on cylinder 1. So yeah, now that's all dialed in and it's up to temp. What I'm going to do is, now I've got full control of the engine, so you can see I'll start it up. So now you can see on the gauges along the bottom, everything that I need to see I can see. Got RPM there, got intake air temperature sense, intake air temperature, coolant temperature, fuel trim. Again, it's not controlling the injectors at the moment, but that doesn't matter. But I can have a look at like the ignition advanced table, and we can tune this advanced table to see if we can pick up a little bit more power just by tuning ignition alone. Good thing with this now, I can actually set an RPM limiter as well. So for instance, if I go to rev limit, just for the sake of this, I'm going to set the rev limit to 2000 RPM, and now it's got a rev limiter at 2000 RPM. If I want to set it a bit higher, 3000 RPM. A little bit like anti-lag, that, isn't it? But yeah, so I'm going to leave the rev limiter at 6000 RPM. I don't think I'll ever go near that, but just wanted to show how simple it is to change things on this ECU. So yeah, right, I'm going to roll it up on the rollers. I'm going to try and dial in the ignition table and see how much power it makes. Just praying it makes more than stock. So yeah, let's do it. My clutch cable. Right, so obviously as you see, the ECU is all up and running. We've dialed it all in, everything's going well. Started doing some tuning. Well, I say tuning, I was just dialing in the ignition curve. The standard ignition module on this van is standard. would have been tuned in like the 80s, around the sort of quality of fuel on the 80s. And obviously this engine doesn't have knock control either, so it would have been quite conservative with how much ignition advance it gave it. You know, so you had a more broader of a timing curve for crap fuel, decent fuel, that sort of thing. Obviously I've got V-Power in my tank, so I know I've got a decent fuel. So I've just kept giving it timing until it stopped making power, and then backed it out a bit. And I found the sweet spot. But I'm sure, as you just heard, I don't know how well the camera picked it up, I put my foot on the clutch, and I think I've snapped my clutch cable, which is absolutely fabulous, because that means that this fan is now stuck on the dyno. So I'm going to need to fix that. But I haven't quite finished tuning it, but I'm going to show you this anyway. Blue line, standard ignition module. Really faint pink line is the MaxxECU tuned. Bearing in mind I've got no control over fuel, and because this is on a carburettor, it is very, very rich. So I think if once I put the proper EFI inlet manifold on it and tune that side of it, I bet I'll be able to get that way past 70 horsepower. But yeah, I'm quite happy with that. As you can see, I made a lot more low down torque, and I made more torque everywhere, all the way to the rev limiter. And again, I made more horsepower. Again, made more horsepower everywhere, all the way to the limiter. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm a bit gutted that the clutch cable snapped though, because I reckon there's a few more ponies to be had. But yeah, is what it is. New figure, 67 horsepower and 125 foot-pound of torque. But yeah, it's just goes to show that this little management kit works well. So yeah, I hope this video is a little bit more informative for you. So you know exactly what you're buying. Everything that I've shown you in the kit is what you get in the kit. And yeah, it's enough to get you up and running, ignition only. But then all the wiring looms here ready to go if you've got an EFI inlet manifold. So yeah, hope you like this video. Any questions, just ask away in the comments and I'll answer them as best as I can. Like, share, subscribe. Cheers guys.